Welcome to the Stop Doing Stupid Stuff podcast, where common sense meets corporate reality and we tackle the workplace habits that make you want to bang your head against your desk. I'm your AI host, bringing you insights from Tim Keefe, CEO of SDSS Global, and Andreas Wieman, Chief Experience Officer of Transform CX, two industry veterans who aren't afraid to call out the elephant stampeding through today's conference rooms. In this episode, our dynamic duo dives headfirst into Lorrie Lykins' eye-opening article, Rethinking Leadership. Again, what CHROs Need to Know, published in HR Executive. Spoiler alert, if you thought leadership challenges were solved in the last decade, think again. With 58% of professionals rating their leaders as only somewhat effective and employee engagement hovering below 30%, it's clear we've got some serious work to do. Get ready for a no-holds-barred conversation about toxic leadership patterns, the personalization revolution that marketing figured out but HR missed, and why your best performers might actually be getting punished for their success. Tim and Andreas bring their signature blend of brutal honesty and practical solutions to help you stop doing the stupid stuff that's killing your organization's potential. Let's get started.
Hey everybody, welcome to the next edition of the exhilarating, always captivating Stop Doing Stupid Stuff podcast. And Tim, I don't know. I feel like I don't know that this podcast is ever going to end because I continue to see people doing stupid stuff. So I don't know. Maybe we just need to get more listeners.
No, I think it's the never-ending story. Remember, like it's one of these things. It's the human nature. I think sometimes that sometimes. And anyway, we can go on about the one place where there's a value proposition for consultants, but that's a different story. Thanks, Andreas. And again, today we want to talk about a really interesting article that Lorrie Lykins published on Friday, August 1st, and Rethinking Leadership. And this was published in HR Executive. Interesting publication, and I think I'm in the community, so I get the articles as they come across. But what's interesting about this is I think Lorrie pulls out some interesting things about leadership, and the fact that leadership is a constantly evolving role within an organization. And I was just having this moment a little bit with Andreas about what is leadership. But with that, let's get going on the article. So Andreas, as you read it, what were your thinking?
There's a lot of parallels in beliefs that I've seen from a firsthand observation perspective, and obviously from a research perspective, and when we work with clients and discovery sessions, etc. So I think Lorrie hit the nail on the head with a lot of the observations and notes that she put in here. So I highly recommend everybody check that article out, see what you think from your observations, and figure out where you can implement some of the suggestions that she posed towards the end of the article. But the real thing that jumped out at me as I was kind of reading through linearly is why leaders are struggling. In this stat that she quoted from Leading from Anywhere, Driving Results in the Age of Distributed Work, 58% of professionals surveyed perceive their leaders as only somewhat effective. 58. Now, I don't know if this is the Likert scale where there's totally ineffective, whatever, and maybe she's only being nice by saying the neutral, somewhat effective, or the promoter, the low promoter category. But that's a pretty staggering number. If you think about the other Gallup State of the Workplace Engagement Survey, where the global engagement rate was sub 30%. I don't remember exactly the number, so I'm going to play it safe and say sub 30% feel engaged. That's a pretty staggering couple of stats. And so in an age where we're trying to get AI proliferation to kick off and doing that completely incorrectly, in my opinion. You can listen to several podcasts over the past, I don't know, 10, 2 years where we talk about that. And you couple with the human necessity or requirement to be functional as a business and trying to find the merging point between those two, it's pretty concerning that I think there's a big fear of workers of, AI taking over. And is there some validity to that? There is in a few industries, but I think largely it's overblown because we both know the complexities involved in machine learning models needed and the data needed to get to that level of human decisiveness and decision making, and the complexity around conforming that to not just a large language model that's kind of cool to play around with on the weekend or cheat on, test for, but actually to run a business effectively. It's complex. It's highly complex. And so when you're still dependent on humans, even though you put a snippet out during an analyst call on your quarterly earnings of, yeah, we're an AI company. We've got 200 AI projects going on. And the analyst is like, well, hey, what's your profitability? It looks like it actually is pretty flat. If you got all these AI projects going on, wouldn't you be more profitable? Wouldn't your yields be a little bit better? And they're like, oh, well, yeah, we're doing all this great stuff. We're going to solve world hunger. So, anyways, I'm being long-winded now, but the point is those two stats, 58% of professionals feel like their leaders are somewhat effective,
Yep.
and the disengagement that occurs via that Gallup workplace survey, I don't know, those are two huge like red flags, and not like a
Well,
little hand flag, but like one of the big flags that you run across the football field with saying, well, maybe we should look at this.
well, yeah, and I think they're closely related. I mean, one of the things, several years ago, I was doing some focus groups for a large BPO company around the world, and the question really was, what is it that drives people to leave their role? And engagement with my supervisor was one of the top three. And to your point, so the question I have continues to be, what does a leader look like in 2025 or 2030? Take your pick. But what is the responsibility within the role? Because I mean, we've been in organizations. And again, both of us come heavily out of the BPO space, but in many organizations, you go, okay, I have a supervisor in an organizational structure. They have a group reporting up to them. Spans and controls have generally gotten much bigger than they used to be. They've gone up and down over the years. But let's say on average, that's 15 to 20 people that are reporting to a supervisor. Okay, what does that supervisor's distribution of work look like? What would the balance scorecard for that supervisor look like? And in a lot of companies we hear, oh, their job is primarily coaching and developing the people on the team, making sure that those people have what they need to be successful to get the work done, and if possible, grow them into the next level job or whatever that might be. Oh, that sounds great. Oh, that's 80% of their time, and then 20% of their time is administrative, developing reports, going to meetings, blah, blah, blah. Well, the reality is usually at best flipped, if not completely eliminate the coaching piece and focus on all the other things, going to meetings. And of course, during the pandemic, with everybody going, oh, look at this cool online stuff. We don't even have to allow time between meetings for people to walk from one conference room to another. So now it's bang, 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 bang all day. All right. So when do I actually engage with the people that report up to me who are looking for support, guidance, coaching, or in some cases, people who don't want me to leave them alone, which I should probably wonder why. Anyway, the point that I'm trying to get at here is, what is the role of a leader in an organization? What's expected from them? And how do we know they're being successful? And I think Lorrie made some interesting points in here that business outcomes are still critical, right, for any team. But they've also got to be doing that in a way that it's got longevity, because you can win in the short term, drive everybody crazy for a weekend, make them come in and work, over the weekends and blah, blah, blah. And you delivered that one deliverable. But what did you do to the overall effectiveness of the organization in doing that? You might get that one spike,
Yeah.
but then are they going to still be around? Because what happens is when they've been burnt out like that and mistreated, they go look for another job. Or
Well, think about that. That's actually a really powerful statement that I think a lot of people should sit back and try to observe in their own organization right now. So the two stats that we shared, sub 30% on engagement, right, from the Gallup poll, and then 58% of professionals, leaders are somewhat effective. So when you think about doing the action that you just said, you really push them, you're pushing everybody really quickly, but you're pushing them. The starting point is they already feel 70% disengaged, and most of them feel like they're only somewhat, what did I say? I want to make sure I'm accurate, somewhat effective. All right, which is very loosey goosey kind of way of saying meh, right? So if you're pushing people from that standpoint, then what are they going to think? Are they going to think, hey, this is a shot in the arm exercise to get head above water, and then we'll have sustainability moving forward? We'll be in a better spot. No, most of them probably got to that point of disengagement, right, and ineffectiveness because of prior actions. And so now what you're doing is assuming that you're going to take this one action from probably the starting point erroneously. You're imagining you have a good engaged team, and that's why you're there. You're a leader. No one looks in the mirror and says, "Oh, I'm kind of a crappy leader, so I better account for that in my variable here." No, they're like, "All right, we're gonna go do this." So that little thing where you say, "Hey, we're working this weekend because we got to hit this deadline," and we're doing that. If your starting point is where these other stats are showing where most organizations are, that is the incorrect baseline. And that's how you can kill longevity is not baselining appropriately and really gauging the temperature of your staff. And then when you're asking them for these actions, having an objective way to measure the contribution that they produce and being able to use that upwards and downwards. And what I mean by that is these poor middle managers that are kind of stuck in the middle who continue to have their spans or ratios increase, right? Because I don't see the executive staff being reduced in terms of number of supporting organizations. It's still kind of running horizontally, but middle management is kind of taking the brunt of it, right, from a cost takeout perspective. So now all of the uh, processes that were there prior to are still there. It's just one person doing double the work. And to your point, that's where the administrative
Well,
workload is taking over. You got to take all of that into consideration if you truly want to be, I think, defined, even to start to be defined as
yep,
a competent
yep.
leader.
Well, and it's interesting. I have a great example. I was talking to one of the people I know recently who was at he's on the e-commerce side of a very large B2C business here in San Francisco. And she works really hard and she does a good job. And last year, they told her they were going to give her an assistant so she could pick up, be more successful, blah, blah, blah. So she gutted it out, really performed. And you know what they did? They said, well, you're doing such a good job. We're going to take that assistant role and assign it to somebody else who's not delivering. So in essence, here's this person who's, you know, delivering, and their supervisor basically says, I'm going to punish you because you're doing a good job.
Oh yeah. What is the old what is the old saying goes? Look, you're doing so well that you're irreplaceable, so we
Uh, it,
can't give you that promotion because no
right.
one's ready to, yeah.
Yeah, because you're the best at what you do, we can't promote you, but we're going to promote this other person because they're not very good at what they're doing, and we're going to get them out of the way. And you're like, what?
Yeah, stellar
Um,
leadership trait there. Yeah, stellar
but
leadership trait.
I was just so shocked to hear it was, 2025, and I'm like, are people still this uninformed? And I think the answer is yes, and that kind of goes back to my whole thing about like where do leaders learn and get trained? Because I don't think in a traditional undergraduate 4-year program, there's a lot of focus on leadership that I'm aware of anyway. I mean, you look at the curriculums and stuff and you say, where in those leaders, in any of those curriculums, do they talk about the fact that you would be the one responsible for decision making across a team? Okay, that's one thing. But even more importantly, your job is to make this team of individuals work together and hopefully in a way that is collaborative and positive so that engagement goes up. Nobody talks about that. I mean, where would you
Well,
even learn that, right? Other than on the job training, and some people get it and some people don't. I mean, which seems like a pretty scary way to run a business.
yeah, yeah, there's you know me well enough and hopefully the listeners pick up on my affinity for pattern recognition. I'm not going to share the patterns that I've noticed over the years and exactly what you just laid out there because I probably can't articulate exactly what's in my head and I'm going to come across as a huge conspiracy theorist. So I'm just going to I'm going to stop and lay it there. But your point is traditional leadership models, they're not broken. They're just not modernized. And I think if we and I think Lori did a pretty good job of again laying this out in the article and the way that she kind of parsed this out, I think was really, really good, just structured it. If you talk about the traditional leadership, she has 5 points, right? Treat all the leaders the same, emphasize
Well,
behavior without adjusting the environment, focus on top performers, confuse delegation with distribution leadership, kind of hits on what you were just kind of talking about there earlier, and then fail to address toxic leadership patterns. So those things right there, I think you have established frameworks for decades that can address each of those things. They're just not retrofitted for modern times. And what you're seeing with the kind of the changing variables that we're facing, which is a bit unique, but can still be managed effectively if the variables are weighted appropriately. And so I think if you look at Lori's article, she outlines it again kind of greatly and lays out the problem and then provides solutions there too. But one thing I want to point out that I thought stuck out to me, the second thing other than that stat that stuck out to me was the personalization. So everybody in marketing found out a long time ago, right? If you can personalize product advert, right, advertisement, and this has gotten even bigger on social media with some of the cookies and tracking, right? It makes it even more personal or relatable, so you have a higher propensity to buy. That's it. Why don't we apply that same logic to the individuals in organizations, regardless of the industry and the vertical, nonprofit, PubSec, et cetera? Why wouldn't you try to figure out in the day and age now with all this AI hype, why wouldn't you try to personalize and assess people what their strengths and weaknesses are, and not some kind of vanilla, assessment? I'm not going to name names on the assessment, but some assessment there, and then try to figure out what are the strengths and weaknesses. It's the typical SWOT, but a modernized SWOT, and then figure out as a leader, what do you need to do to ensure that the strengths are maintained and there's not regression and it's balanced out with improving on the areas of opportunity for them. And I don't know, maybe to use AI to help you with that, right? It's still a human function, leveraging AI, human intelligence and artificial intelligence, as we say hi to AI. But I don't see, to your point, I don't see anything like that either. It's still very vanilla, generic type of approaches that I'm
Well,
seeing.
and if they do get quote unquote leadership training, when people get promoted within an organization, they're lucky if there's actually structured tools that they can get to that are at the very least around things like policy or, what are the critical things that as a supervisor you need to be aware of? There are legal things, right? I mean, she calls out in Lori's article, and I think one of the things that I see a lot of, and companies are getting much worse at dealing, which is kind of interesting, is the whole toxic behavior thing. And sometimes you don't see it until it's almost too late. And, you think about, in situations, there was a very terrible one a couple of years ago, but it's in the maritime industry. And so a shipboard environment is very isolated. It's not like you can get up and walk off, right? If
Right.
there's a problem going on. And they had a situation there where a chief engineer, who's a very senior member of the ship's crew, was essentially sexually assaulting the female cadets who are on there to learn. And this was well documented. CNN had a bunch of stories on it. So this is out there without naming names. But the situation there is you have, again, enclosed environment. You have a senior manager within the group who is essentially, you can't think of a more abusive and toxic situation than what was going on. And yet no one could do anything about it because they didn't have a safe way of leaving. And when the company was finally informed about it, they chose not to act. And what does that say? And
Yeah.
and again, you think about the risk, the financial risk, and the reputational risk of that kind of situation. But that could happen in a warehouse, that could happen in a storefront, that could happen anywhere. I mean, any office can have that. And that toxic behavior, whether it's at a supervisor, being abusive, or a coworker being abusive, a bully in the office, these things can be really bad. And so how do we teach supervisors, to your point, using pattern recognition to understand that there might be a problem and be able to address that problem long before it becomes a legal problem? And if nothing else, that's what every company should be looking for, is like, how do we protect our employees and therefore protect ourselves? I guess I want to, kind of thinking about the closing out here, because I think you and I could go on and on for hours about this. But I think the reality here is, look, leadership is a critical role still in all organizations. Whether it's the span of control is huge and grows, and whether I have AI tools that can help me as a manager focus my energies in the places where they're most needed, which I think is where AI is going to play into this. But also the fact that, am I getting the right support as a supervisor and leader to be effective? Where do I go to for help? And what does that look like so that I can deal with these things? And the reality is everybody's different. Everybody's going to have different buttons that motivate them. They have different triggers that are going to be necessary for them to step up and go, I can communicate more effectively. And most importantly, I think the biggest risk for new supervisors is they react in fear. And this is where their managers need to help them, right? They need to make sure that they recognize where they have full support. And as long as they're operating within the mission of the organization and the messaging, then they're in a safe place. But if they don't know what's safe and they're left alone, they're going to react in fear. And that's where you get toxic behavior. That's where you get reactive behavior, all the triggers that Lorrie talks about here. So
Yeah, self-preservation and humanism kicks in.
that's right. Fight or flight. And usually it's fight.
Exactly.
If you can't run, you're going to fight. So with all of that, I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. Andreas and I, we are absolutely passionate about the criticality and the importance of the human in the equation, regardless of the technology. And so, thanks again for listening. Andreas?
Agreed. Just big shout out to Lorrie for a great article. I hope everybody checks it out. We'll link to it when we post the podcast. Thanks, everybody. We will see you next week. You want to tee up what we're talking about next week, Tim, or you want to keep it a
No,
surprise?
let's keep it a surprise, but it might begin with the big L word.
All right. We'll keep it under wraps per my cellmate here, because obviously we'll get thrown in the hole if we share. Apparently, I don't know. All right.
All
Thanks,
right.
everybody.
Take care. Bye.